Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, has proposed an overhaul of taxation norms for multinationals. Now, this move aims to extract more corporate tax from large multinationals, whether they are digital or own highly profitable brands, such as luxury goods makers or global car companies. This global shake-up of corporate taxation seeks to overturn a century of rules that have allowed digital conglomerates like Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix and Google to shift profits around the world to minimize their tax bills. While the jury is still out on what this means for large economies like the US, the report is a shot in the arm for countries like India as it seeks to implement regulations to levy tax on corporate income earned from sales on its soil. This proposal for a unified approach impacts 132 countries and is now open to public consultation and has raised many questions. The primary one being, how do companies determine if the rules apply to them? How old will the old and the new rules interact? And of course, what does this mean for global corporate tax regimes? Hello and welcome to Eye on India. I'm Shireen Bhan. And joining me to answer some of these questions is Kate Barton, the Global Vice Chair Tax EY, and Vijay, a partner and national leader transfer pricing at EY India. Kate, Vijay, many thanks for joining us. Kate, before we talk about what the OECD has proposed, let me ask you about the tax landscape globally in general. I remember in 2018, you said that it's becoming extremely disruptive. Has it gotten worse?
I'm afraid it has. There is just so much change. Many companies are having difficulty around the world keeping pace with the amount of change. 1 out of 3 elected officials around the world have changed, and the first thing they do is they go to the tax code of their country and they try to change the laws so that they can fulfill their campaign promises. So much change.
So is this one of the key risks when you talk to multinationals, when you talk to CEOs today? Is tax and the tax implications because of these changes that are already happening or on the anvil, is this a key risk that they factor in today?
It really is. It's really one of the top 3 issues that the C-suite of most companies are consumed with. They want to make sure that they don't overpay their taxes, but they want to make sure that they're fully complying. And so it's a big issue, a lot more risk.
Speaking of risk, and you know, the tax risk has been a key risk associated with investing in India. Predictability of tax has been a key concern. Retrospective action has been a key concern. Has it gotten any better? What's the feedback that you get?
I think there has been some progress made. Certainly, though, I will still hear from some multinationals that they want dispute resolution to go faster in India. So they just want to understand the rules of the game, and then how do they get through controversies between 2 governments in a faster way. So we're working more with companies to make that happen.
Okay, let's now talk about the issue that everyone's discussing, and there are many questions that remain unanswered, but the consultation process has a sense of urgency with the OECD moving faster with this whole digital service tax issue. How do you look at this? Because, you know, the US is stridently opposing this. Developing countries like India want to move ahead. The UK and France have already moved forward with some measures of their own. How are you reading the OECD's proposals?
Well, we're excited that it's moving as quickly as it is, and it's certainly a lofty ambition to try to get uniformity and have a multilateral action like what the OECD is contemplating. So what they released last week that really is the talk of the town right now is Pillar 1, more
unified approach.
Yes, a unified approach. And so what's in there is they want to first say that they can tax places that they haven't been able to tax before. So they're looking at really, do you have an economic nexus in the jurisdiction?
And not necessarily a permanent establishment or a physical presence. Yeah,
exactly, which is really a breakthrough. And you know, we've seen that in a few places, but this would be a global approach to having economic nexus. And then secondly, how do you allocate the profits for that you know, situs in a particular country? So huge breakthrough in terms of, you know, new rules and really a departure from the arm's length standard that we've seen in some instances.
You know, I'll discuss the profit reallocation formula that the OECD is talking about in just a second. But Vijay, let's talk about what this means for countries like India. You know, we brought in the equalization levy a few budgets ago, and now India was planning to move ahead with a digital service tax, and then they decided to put it on hold till the OECD came up with a framework, because the hope is that if we move, then the world should ideally move together. What could the implications be for a country like ours?
So clearly, I think the current focus is on digital, which means that there are users in India, there is customers in India. India is a big market. So clearly, from a revenue standpoint, India stands to gain. But my question is, how far will we go in this? Are we going beyond digital? Will we go to the physical goods as well? Will the US insist on, because US is the biggest market in the world, so they may say if market is the critical driver, then the US should get everything out of most of the business models. So where is this headed? We don't know. But clearly, India is looking at it right now from a digital standpoint.
Right.
India will stand to gain because it is a large market.
It is a large market, and so the economic significance issue will play out as far as India is concerned. But let's talk about the profit reallocation and the kind of formula that the OECD is proposing and what that could mean and the implications it could have. Do you believe that, in terms of revenue threshold, what should be the sort of rationale and the driving force behind that?
Well, I think that really they have to get to the fundamental. Do you have a significant economic involvement in the local market? And so they're looking at maybe sales as being a measure. Now, in some other jurisdictions, for example, Brazil has had something like this. They would look at payroll, property, and sales, a more comprehensive look. And so whether sales ends up being the ultimate, we'll have to see what so many of the taxpayers and companies around the world will fill in comments. But that's what they're looking at right now.
Vijay?
So we have had some indication. We have equalization levy.
Yes.
We have the draft PE attribution rules, which also talks about a formula, which gives emphasis to the customer. It gives emphasis to people and assets. So we have some indication of the way India is looking at it. And then we have the significant economic presence in the rules, which also is not yet fully notified, but we know which way India is thinking of it. So there are various formulas that India is proposing. There is a UK formula, there's a US formula. I think all three are being worked on right now.
That is right, and the consultation process is underway. But Kate, if you were to talk about the big shifts that have happened on the tax landscape, and let's talk about what happened with BEPS, and we're still sort of seeing that play itself out. Right. So what do you believe will need to be the guardrails that each jurisdiction will need to keep in mind and put in place to ensure that this transition, as and when it happens, and the assumption is 2020, but as and when it happens, it will be smooth? Right.
So I think there's a couple of fundamentals. One is most companies are paying a single level of tax on their profits, and I think that's where they want to stay. We have to make sure that in all of this new rulemaking, companies don't end up with double taxation. That is going to make it very expensive for a multinational to actually do business. And I think that could be the worst outcome of this. So I think in the effort to make sure that all income is taxed in a single jurisdiction, terrific. Most companies would sign up for that every day. The second is they want just the predictability. So if there are disputes, how can we get the disputes resolved quicker? So they want certainty in their financial statements. So those are two guidelines. One level of tax, and then also certainty if there is, in fact, disputes between countries. And what has the experience been like with the BEPS and shifting to the BEPS regime? And, dispute resolution has been an issue. Unilateral action has also been an issue. Interpretational issues continue to sort of worry companies. What's the experience been like? Well, I think that in BEPS 1, as we like to call it, there were a lot of good concepts. I think that all tax planning really has substance at the heart of it, so there's no forms or companies that don't have a lot of substance in it. So I think that's one. But remember, the OECD issues guidelines, and then it's up to every country to implement them. And we did see in BEPS 1, some countries got ahead of the issuance. So we had, for example, deferred profits tax in the UK. So everybody interprets it. They kind of read the same guideline, but then it's amazing what will happen on the ground in every country. So that's, that's something that I hope in this BEPS 2.0 we get better at, and so the countries actually implement something that's more consistent. But that might be very hard. Would you be confident about that, given the fact that we're seeing more and more unilateral decisions, not just related to tax, but even otherwise, and a more insular approach being taken by large economies as well? So would that then come in the way of a standardized, harmonized sort of rollout? Shireen, that's my biggest fear. I think that we are in an environment right now where nationalism seems to be trumping, I hate to use that word, but a global perspective. So we need to continue to look for that and see. So I'm a little worried about that aspect. Which is specifically in India, how much of a concern would that be?
So if I look at it, India has been a leader when it came to equalization levy.
Yeah.
But on significant economic presence, we came up with the law, but we didn't come up with the rules. We took our own time to say that let's look at global consensus. So I think India is also looking at being part of that global community and not do unilateral actions too much. But I think equalization levy had to be done at that stage when it had to come. But at this stage, I think India is still looking for the consensus, and they're, I think, anticipating that in the year or year and a half, we should get some consistency on approach.
Kate, do you believe that given the fact that this is an open issue, so to speak, at this point in time, and as this consultation process plays itself out, that people will hold back investments, that the large digital companies may in fact hold back investments? Is that a concern?
It's always a concern, but I think companies will continue to move. I think they want to get this right, and the business operations are so global that you just can't wait for the rules to change, so it's just moving too fast. I think companies, even with all the geopolitical uncertainty, what we're seeing is transformation right now is making companies take action.
Yeah. Well, speaking of taking action, and I wanted to speak with you about what happened in the U.S. with the corporate tax reduction, because we've just announced a big corporate tax reduction here in India, and it would be insightful to understand how the tax cut actually helped, if at all, in economic revival in the U.S., because that's the assumption being made here in India, that this will lead to a revival in private capex, it will get people to kickstart investing in setting up fresh capacities, or will we see more of the buyback route being adopted? So what's the experience been like in the U.S.?
The experience has been very positive in the U.S. Almost every business, really across the whole country will say that U.S. tax reform was better for them. I do think it's had a significant contribution in our economy. So clearly some companies at first did the share buybacks, but we have seen capital expenditures go up. The 100% bonus depreciation has really helped. I mean, just getting, the write-offs immediately when you make business expansion plans, that's been positive. It's really encouraged companies to manufacture in the U.S. and then export, because there's a special rate for exportation. There's so many facets to the legislation, and some of it's still just being realized because regulation packages are coming out, and it's incredibly complex, but companies are excited.
Yeah, let's talk about what this could mean then for India, because we've announced a corporate tax cut, and I think the big one is to try and draw in fresh foreign direct investment, get people to move supply chains to India if they're moving out of China, and that's the hope with the 17% tax number that we've announced. Do you see that happening, or do you believe that the larger competitiveness package for India still needs some work?
I think that this is a pretty attractive package that India has put forth. I think that India, and I talk to a lot of multinationals right now, India has a good tax rate now and is an attractive alternative to China. I think that they need to continue to build off on the momentum of having the infrastructure so that goods can be made here and then shipped to other locations in a more easy fashion.
As you look at tax sort of being the incentive to draw in FDI specifically, how are you seeing that playing out, especially for a lot of the emerging economies?
Well, I think tax is the first step, and then I think where India has a big advantage is the workforce. It's a very educated workforce with the engineers and the mathematicians and all the things that we need in a very digital world. India has a huge advantage. So tax rate's important to get it started, but then, just look at the demographics and the wonderful people that are here in India.
Yeah.
And they add a lot of value.
I'll talk to you about EY's growth plans for India, but Vijay, on the corporate tax issue, there was a lot of euphoria and a lot of enthusiasm, but as people sort of go through the fine print, especially with the MAT business, how soon do you really see this being used to kickstart the private investment cycle?
So first of all, I think this was a promise that had been made earlier,
yes.
So the promise has been kept, so that is a good thing.
Well, the 15% wasn't a promise, so that's new.
It's beyond
that's
the
new,
promise,
yeah.
So it's beyond the promise, so that's great. There was already a lot of interest on India. There was already a lookout for an option beyond China and building capacities outside of China. And that clearly opens up opportunity for India. Even though India may have been on the list, but it kind of takes it up the list significantly.
Right.
What we need to do is to get our act together to be able to get them rest of the stuff, the infrastructure, the land acquisitions, the approvals, and
to be more competitive. And we've dropped 10 places on the World Economic Forum's competitiveness index. So what you're saying, and Kate is saying, this is good, it's important, but it may not necessarily be sufficient. We need to do more. Well, on that note, we'll take a break, but don't go anywhere. There's a lot more conversation coming up on Eye on India.